Okay, so let's go through creating an Active Directory user and group in Azure Active Directory. Now, to get here, I created an Azure account, azure.microsoft.com, and logged in. And when you log in and you set up for free trial, you'll have a trial for 30 days. There are some services that are always free, but you'll have a trial for 30 days and they'll give you up to like a $200 credit to use in that first 30 days. So once you get there and you come into Microsoft Azure, you're sitting here at the Azure Services screen. And if you don't see Azure Active Directory, you can do a search for it up here, or you can go to More Services, which is going to list out more different services for you to play with, and then you can filter them or again search up here. So I want to do, well, let's see, I've already looked for Azure Active Directory. So I'm just going to click on Azure Active Directory. And that populates here. Okay, now I want to create a new user in Azure Active Directory. Notice this is not the same standard Active Directory. So similar names, Active Directory is on site on your server. Azure Active Directory is hosted in Azure and it's managed through this interface. You can also run a virtual machine in Azure and run Active Directory on it, which would be basically a virtual machine hosted locally. So it's another way of looking at Active Directory through Azure. So lots of different things with similar names can get really, really confusing. But this is Azure Active Directory without a virtual machine. So to create a new user, I'm going to come over here to my users. And this is going to list all my users. And I just have the one that I created the account with. So I want to add a new user. And I've got a couple of options here. I can add a new user, or I can add a new guest user. So we're going to do a new user rather than a guest user. And then we can either create a user or we can invite a user. And notice we can also do this in bulk, which becomes very, very helpful. So I'm going to create a new user, and it's going to default to this domain name right here. And I've only got the one, ddaltonyvccgmail on Microsoft.com. And that's going to be fine for what I want. I can create other custom domains, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So I'm going to put in a username, and I'm going to create Josiah. And that's going to be my username. Just tab over here. Name is Josiah Simpson. And then Josiah. And anytime you see a little I over here, it'll give you a little bit more information. So I can set a password, either auto-generate the password or let me create. I can display the password if I want to see what it looks like. I can choose which groups I want him to go in, and I can choose which role that I want him to have. Now, I haven't created any groups yet, so we're going to leave that alone. Here under roles, I can choose which role I want him to have, and you'll see all of these roles here for different active or Azure functions. Now, in this case, I just want him to be a standard user. So that's fine. I'm going to leave that as a standard user. And let me just show you one other thing. These are checkboxes over here, so I can put him into multiple ones of these groups if I want to. And remember, I haven't created, any of these roles. And these are all Active Directory, Azure Active Directory default roles. Okay, let me close that. Block sign in, yes or no. I can set a usage location where he is allowed to access from, because remember, Azure Active Directory, we're available from anywhere. So I can choose anywhere worldwide. So I can choose a specific location. I only want him to come from wherever. And then when I'm done, I just click create, and that's going to create my user. And so now I have a user, Josiah Simpson, user type member, and all the information about that user. And if I click on that user, this is going to give me more information about him. So I can edit the user, reset the password, revoke the sessions. We'll see more data down here. And then this is going to give me the option to change roles, administrative units, groups, applications, licenses. All right, you get the idea. I can manage the user entirely just by clicking on the user. All right, so creating a one-off user that way is pretty straightforward. What if I wanted to create a group? because remember we're typically going or will frequently assign permissions in groups. It just simplifies things for us. So I want to go back to the default directory. So I'm in all users. I need to get back, so I'll just back up here. And now I want to add a group. And so I can search groups, add filters, download groups, add a new group, view different columns. We're just going to add a new group here. And we're going to make this group. Now we've got a couple of different types of groups here. We can create a security group or a Microsoft 365 group. So remember, anytime we have a little I up here, we can it'll tell us a little bit about it. Microsoft 365 groups used for collaboration. Security groups give members access to applications, resources, licenses, etc. So we need to set a group name, and I'm going to set this group to, we'll do something really basic. Privileged users. And then a more complete description if I want. So membership type, I can select dynamic membership to this group, I can set owners, and I can do specific members. So I'm going to go ahead and while I'm here, I'm going to add Josiah. Do a search for Josiah. Here's Josiah Simpson. I want to add Josiah to this group and select. And so now I've got a new security group with named privileged users with a member added, and then I'm just going to create that group. All right. Just like with users, if I want to manage a group, I can do so just by clicking on it. And so I can delete the group, look at features. This will give me more information about the group, the type, the source, how many users I can view members. And from here, I can add a new member. I can select a member and remove them. I can do bulk operations, importing, removing, downloading members. All right, so everything is going to be managed right through this interface. So let me go back to my default directory up here. So real quick, we've seen how we can create a new Active Directory user and a new Active Directory group and add a user to a group. Now I also want to show you, let me hop over here to users. So now that I have Josiah, I can go ahead and click on him, and remember in the groups we added him to a group. I can also come down here to groups and I can see which groups he's in and then add him to new groups or remove him from groups. So just like with standard Active Directory, I can either go into the user and associate them with groups or go into groups and then add users in. It's the same thing. I can do it either direction, and it brings me to the same point. Okay, one other thing that I want to point out, and that is we were talking about domains. So when I went to create a user, it asked me which domain they wanted to be on. Okay, if I don't see the domain that I want, and the default domain, let me go back in and show this to you again. We go to users, and right here, let me expand that. All right. So here is the default domain, ddaltonyvcc@gmail, and that's the account that I used, ddaltonyvcc@gmail.com. So that's what it used to create this .onmicrosoft.com account. All right, if that's not the domain name that I want, I can create custom domains. And so let me go back to my default directory up here. And we're going to find that here under custom domain names. Now this becomes really useful if I'm trying to associate it with a domain that I already own, be it a local domain or a domain that I've registered or whatever. So this gives me the domains that I currently have. And this one, you really can't get rid of it. I mean, this is your initial one, so you're kind of stuck with it. It doesn't matter. You don't have to really use that. You can wait for this to reload. Okay, there we go. Back to my custom domain names. And here's where I would add a custom domain name. And I'm going to do ddaltondemo.com. And so that's going to show me the domain name. And I don't want to add it because, somebody might actually use that. But this is going to be, notice the note here, to add a domain, you must already own the domain and have the necessary credentials to update the DNS records. So, yeah, Pretty straightforward. So I obviously don't want to add that, but that's where you would go in and add a custom domain so you're not having to use the on Microsoft domain name, which obviously gets a little bit hairy. Once you do that, then you can create users in those additional custom domains. Okay, so hope that makes sense. Just a real quick overview of creating users and groups inside Azure Active Directory.